What's good, guys? Welcome to Fed by Fire. I'm Christian Whitlow. Today I wanted to do something a little different. Instead of putting together a video where we break down a case, I wanted to do something, where with a little bit more of a natural vibe, where, it's just like me and you are having a conversation. But today I wanted to explain what it was like to have a $400 a day habit. What it was like every day going from $1 to well with nothing but a dream. And a lot of people think, it might be a rock star lifestyle. It's not. It's a full-time hostage situation. So if you, haven't watched any of my previous videos, I was addicted to opiates and ice for 14 years from the time, I was basically 13, 14 till the time I was 27. And I'm not glamorizing anything. This is for educational purposes only. This is for clarity, and I'm speaking from experience, not trying to romanticize any of this, and, speak about what it actually means to, live this way. So let's break down some of the math. When I first started doing it, I was paying, I was always getting a good deal, but still, I was having to figure out a way to get it every day. So, and I didn't realize just, how bad the sickness was until it actually happened to me. So first, what started all this was my mom. She got a prescription of Lortabs, and, that made her very popular amongst, my sister's crowd and, all of her friends. And let's say that pretty much started, the journey to a bunch of very, shady, sketchy characters hanging out at my house. And, my house growing up was one of those places where my mom, she didn't want me in the streets getting in trouble. And, she had a big heart. She treated all my friends, just like her own. But, what evolved from pills eventually turned to H, eventually turned to Fetty. Which eventually, turned to my downfall, which led to jail. And then led to, me getting sober, changing my life, and, getting a job, and doing all the things that I, could not maintain before. And nobody wants to hire somebody that has to go to the bathroom every 30 to 45 minutes at least to get well, or somebody, that's walking in with their arms all swelled up, dripping pus and shit, and I've been that guy, and, it's not fun, it's shameful, or, you smell not that great from days of, sleeping wherever, nodding out in whatever alley, you just happen to sit at, but that type of environment is what felt normal to me, to us, to the people I was around. And, there's a difference between getting high and avoiding sickness. Definitely. And that was the line that I didn't cross for a long time. I just thought, I was enjoying a buzz and thought as long as I didn't do the pills 3 days in a row, I was okay. And that works for so long, but eventually, if you're doing that type of stuff, you're going to use them for longer than 3 days, especially when you got the supply, And, tolerance is something, too, that honestly is your worst enemy. At the end of it, I wasn't even nodding anymore, and that's what I chased, was the nodding feeling. I wanted to live in the nod, and ask anybody that's ever, done this type of stuff. The tolerance climbs fast. And then, the higher your tolerance is, the more money you're spending. And, it's crazy how fast weekend use, what you would call edging goes from that to full-blown survival mode. Every morning the reality sets in, and you usually have the choice the night before. There's a lot of lingo and slang amongst the culture, like what they call a gate shot, having one for when you wake up out the gate. A lot of times, you make that choice to either do it before you wake up, then you're waking up sick and don't have nothing to get you going. And that's the morning reality that you have to face every day. So being a junkie actually, takes a lot of planning. But, when you think about your legacy, do you really want your legacy to be like, not how cool of a dude you were, how good of a father you were, but, wow, I got the highest? Because I had to, sit with that reality, but everybody has their time. Everybody has to bump their head and figure it out on their own. I know I did. Anybody could have sat in front of me. You could have, the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of the future, whatever, they could have showed me it all. I wouldn't have cared because I had to feel it. And my dad always said, if you can't learn, you can feel. And I definitely had to feel. And it was one of those things, your first thought every day is getting money. And, at first, you're able to keep your moral compass and you try to, sustain at least from doing any type of activities you usually wouldn't. When it first started out, I would never do anybody wrong. I would never burn any type of bridge because I knew what it was like to be taken from. I knew what it was like to be robbed. Towards the end of my path, that didn't matter. All that mattered was getting well, staying well, and making sure that, the partner in my codependent relationship was well as well. That way so we could keep the peace and, just keep the ball rolling. And, the anxiety before your eyes even open. I used to, try to get my partner to, hit me before I woke up because my life was just so miserable and waking up was so hard that I just wanted that warm, fuzzy feeling before I even opened my eyes. And the physical symptoms are crazy once you're without, the sweating, the shaking, the stomach cramps, the panic, the body pain, the restless legs. Y'all know what I'm talking about. And it eventually, towards the end, once I got on methadone, I was such on a high, milligram of methadone that I was basically just wasting dope. But in my mind, I wanted to keep doing the shit because in my mind, I had an appetite, just like I had an appetite for food. I, had to get well, had to get full, and, that's what my life was centered around. Not being a father and, not being a father or a partner or, a productive member of society by any means. But, along came that I had fun at times, but more than anything, it was sickness, it was desperation, and, having to look into my mother's eyes and my daughter's eyes and see that disappointment every day on a daily day basis. And at the time, they were living in a hotel room, and I couldn't look in the mirror and say, Christian, get your fucking shit together. Your people, they're not doing good. Get a job, help take care of them, get them out of their situation. I couldn't even do that. But, after a lot of adversity, my kids thankfully are very resilient and, gave me a lot of chances. and understood my journey and how far I came. But back to what we're talking about, because I want to speak to the people who don't have a peek inside this type of, lifestyle. But, let's talk about the hustle cycle. So every day becomes find money, cop, get your shit, use, repeat, and then talk about how exhausting, this mentally was every day, this cycle. Some days, it would be different stuff like, all type of activities. There were times I never successfully did it, but I always had the dream of getting money from a catalytic converter. There was a couple times that there was once I found one that somebody had cut off of a bus, and we took that and got $240 for that. That I was always, getting phones somehow and taking them to the eco ATMs. When shit got bad, I was getting, electronics, anything you can think of, trying to flip anything, flipping Jordans. It didn't matter. If it had a price and it was in front of me and it wasn't tied down, I was going to take that shit and sell it, And, if you weren't one of my people, chances are I was not going to be, a good person to do business with towards the end of my addiction. But, the constant phone calls of, people hitting you up, it's just a web in the environment, the rides you got to get, the texting, the driving, the waiting around. It gets old, and anybody will tell you that. And you're just never able to, relax. You're always running 24/7, just like a hamster on a hamster wheel. And there's times you can't even listen to a song because, your phone's ringing so much, and that's just how the lifestyle is. And when it's good, it's good. When it's bad, it's really bad. And, the financial destruction was real. So I believe for a long time, especially when I was younger, when I was 16, I got my own trailer. I had my son at 17, and believe, once I put my kids to sleep, what I did at night was my business. And, I believed that I could use as long as I could keep it together and take care of my family. Ultimately, that was not the truth. But, it first started with me being able to work a job, having a little side hustle, flipping what I could, but it always ended in shambles. Just a mix of, I got a big heart, and when you have a big heart and you're in that environment and you want to take care of everybody, you're going to lose every time. I did good in some cases, but at the end of the day, it was more good than bad. And what do I have to show for it now? If I can help anybody not go down that path, that's what these videos are here to do. And, so you think about that. $400 a day, that's, $2,200 a week. It was ridiculous. So, it was basically like a street obstacle course every day to feed that monster inside of me. I had to sell every possession that I ever got. Nothing had value to me. It's honestly sad because I was very, very blessed. My dad got me, he made Christmas awesome. Always got me everything I wanted. But, through my substance use, I usually hawked the shit or traded it or it got stolen. And it got to the point my mom, she wouldn't even buy me anything. And my dad, he wouldn't buy me anything either. He would only get me fast food gift cards at Christmas time. Actually, this past Christmas, he gave me some cash, and that was, an achievement in itself. But when you're in that lifestyle, nothing has any value. Nothing has any sentimental value. The only thing that matters is being well. And the lying and manipulation and how much you go outside of your character, to have to, feed this monster inside of you is crazy, because you do things that you would never usually do yourself. And when you're in a later chapter in life, you'll think back and be like, how the fuck did I do that? And I think that to myself all the time, especially when I ride around in certain areas. I think about people I wish that I could apologize to, and bridges I hadn't burned. And jobs, like I said, were impossible to keep. I had debt piling up around me. Nobody would even let me borrow $20. I couldn't even make a paycheck, let alone, have a job to get one paycheck. I would start a job and probably get fired within the first day. Once I got a job as the Easter Bunny, and I went to the methadone clinic after, and on my break, I fell asleep at lunchtime, and somebody took a picture of me, and that was my end as the Easter Bunny. That's just what it was. And all my relationships were trash. I was a horrible person to my wife. The person I have kids with now, she'll tell you I was a monster at times. I was, I did despicable things that, I had to forgive myself for, but it's just hard to think back and be like, damn, that really happened. And the isolation it creates with family and friends is, it's something, it's devastating. Like, it really is, and you will fight it. You'll have no trust amongst your family and friends. You will be missing from birthdays, you will be missing from holidays, and that's part of what it's like having a $400 a day habit. Everyone becomes either a connection, a risk, a lick, or someone you owe, and the guilt from hurting people you loved only fuels your use, because you just want to stay numb, because all you see in the mirror is a piece of shit. And until you change certain things, that's all you're going to see. But you start doing A, B, and C, you fix X, Y, and Z, and that reflection will start to change. And if you're seeing this video right now, hear me out. The psychological side, the paranoia, the depression, the feeling spiritually empty, living in the survival mode 24/7, losing your personality, your passions, any type of sports, any type of hobbies you ever had, kiss that shit goodbye, because at the end of the day, you might tweak and fucking put a lighter together or fucking color some shit. That's cool, but doing anything really, really, you're not able to give stuff the same devotion and attention that a normal person would. And I fought with that myself, because if you would have asked me in active use about anything I was doing, I thought I was the fucking best around at everything. And you'll look in the mirror and you'll start not to recognize yourself. But denial is one of the biggest traits. And the physical damage, don't even get me started. When I got sober on December 18th, 2024, I was 145 pounds. Right now, I'm 225. So think about that for a second. If you ask me, I thought I looked good. And if you would have fucking... believe me, I got in fights all the time and shit. It was actually the time in my life where I was dealing with the most conflict just because of the life I was living, and I looked rough, and my wife will tell you that. I had fucking poor dental health, poor hygiene a lot of times, a lot of sleep deprivation, but, all in all, I was a clean junkie. I kept my general appearance good, you know what I mean? But, I almost lost my arm to tranq in 2023. I had to deal with 11 overdoses, hospital stays, scaring all of my family constantly. My dad having to take life insurance policies out on me. None of that's fun, and I don't wish that on nobody. And after a while, ask anybody who's done it. Your body starts breaking down piece by piece. And the myth people don't understand is addiction stops being about pleasure. And you're spending hundreds just to feel like you're not dying. And the high gets shorter, the sickness gets worse, and the drug owns your schedule completely. It's one of those things. It's always, it's one love. I will catch you guys on the next one. I am looking for guests. Hit me up if you have a story about drugs, addiction, crime. Get at me. Peace.